Hello
What up, Daily
and
Motion
welcome
Show?
back.
And also YouTube and also Discord stage.
What's up, everybody?
As you can see, we're doing another one of these. Call
We
now.
are doing
Join the Discord.
ring us in on the silly little Discord phone, and we'll answer your silly little questions.
We're gonna just chat about motion design, answer all your hardest hitting questions, whether financial or technical or industry, whatever. We're here, and so are our brains. Hopefully, they have some good things to say. But if you are in the stage and would like to come on and ask a Q, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll go ahead and chat. But in the meantime, what a fun short that we made yesterday about the brand new properties panel.
Properties panel.
And the fact that the Adobe folks actually liked that short is great, considering Danny threw in a feet pics channel as well as our voice chat being sexy people only and other stuff like that. And Adobe was still like, yes, this is what we need. Let's go. I love it. I love
I'm
it.
reposting hers,
I love
and
the
I'm
support.
trying to figure out what to caption it.
Like,
Some front
we
runners.
have
All
some
right,
Adobe genies now.
quick, we have their attention. Everybody.
That's good. That's good. I love that.
Um,
That's hilarious.
get them.
Ryan says, "What's your favorite After Effects plugin?" It's Overlord for me, 100%. Saved me way more time than anything else, and that's what makes the best plugins for me.
What is?
Overlord, best plugin for
Overlord.
me.
Best plugin. Easily best plugin. It's just the most helpful, like, kind of plugin. Like, of course that should be there.
Right.
I have Motion for it. I don't have any other of the, like, fancy graph plugins, but
Yeah.
I use Motion for a lot because it's really easy to just slam the graph to the left. Peaks exactly how I want them without having to go into the graph editor and go, because everybody knows Adobe's UI is not fun sometimes. So
See, now we're gonna be nicer now that people are actually looking at our stuff from Adobe. Sorry, everyone, for things that we've said. Also,
oh,
if you're in the YouTube chat and would like to be able to call in, the link to join the review Discord is in the description. You'll just join the stage chat from in there, and we'll bring you on. But otherwise,
absolutely.
pop your cues in the chat. We'll do it that way too.
Give us cues. Happy Friday, everyone.
Ryan says, I contract for Adobe Live pretty frequently. We should get you guys on it. Sounds good. Let's do it. That sounds fun. That's on Behance, correct? I think so. Does it also restream on YouTube and other platforms, or is it just Behance? He says, I'll hit you up about coming on in July. Perfect. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Zappo, what's going on, dude? We gotta hang out. We still haven't actually met in person despite living somewhat near each other. Come on.
I'm so far away. Dash
Let's do it. Dash Bash. If you come to Dash Bash, we'll be there.
Dash Bash?
I don't know. We'll find out. I don't want to give too much promo, but you know, there. Says when storyboarding an animation that involves multiple different mediums, how do you go about processing the immensity of the universe and the reality that your time in it is but a mere blip? Well, first step is just you hit F9 and
open the
from there you kind of like not only ease the graphs but also your brain a little bit, you know.
Yeah, realize that everything is a curve in a way.
And
so
you just, go with the curves, go with the flow of the speed graph. It's a great time.
And you must be able to ride the waves, ride the curves.
Multiple different mediums to us just means using shapes other than just a circle. So, for that, we just like take out those old blocks that you'd have as a kid. You've got the hole for the triangle, the circle, and the square, and we just sort of like reorient ourselves to better understand, like, oh yes, these shapes go here. We don't just have to use the circle. See.
What was your experience with those blocks and fitting the shapes inside? Were you particularly good at them? Was there a way that you approached them that might appear in your daily problem-solving life now?
I think by the time I was 20, I finally had it figured out.
Okay.
Prior to then, though, I really just, like, for whatever reason, I just kept, like, pouring water in it or something. And
yeah, because
that fit in
it might lube it up.
Like that fit in every single one of them.
Interesting. You really thought outside of the box, and I'll tell you, I also kind of, as a curious child, I wanted to think about, I wanted to take the problem and really expand it to beyond just the fitting them inside of the box, and I wanted to see how many of them could actually fit inside of my esophagus, and so I went with that. It took me to the hospital, um, but I found out. So
This is also
the
off the
star hurt
rails.
the most.
This is
So.
so off the rails now. This has gone too far into the bit.
It's a good bit.
Treslex, or I think that's Alexander, says, "What do you mean? The circle is the only shape needed in motion. Didn't you hear?" Well, nobody told me, man. Nobody.
A square is just a circle with 4 points. Four
You just like
corners.
squish the sides, and eventually it
Yeah.
becomes like some sort of a rectangle or something.
James says, "First Q, how you guys doing?" How you doing?
Clearly, we're having a great Friday. This is what you get when Daily Motion Show is a little later in the day, I guess. And
Greetings from
it's
Chile.
just Q&A.
Greetings
having a good
from
time.
not Chile. So
Greetings
hope I
from
catch you.
the USA, US of A.
US or
Also appreciate the
second
kind words. Thank you.
from James. How often do you get contacted for a project and turn it down?
Depends
From
on
time to time.
I'd say like
Go ahead.
now we're not turning things down as much. Like when business is a little slower, it's we're more willing to take some other things that we might not have if we were super busy already. But we were pretty busy towards the end of last year, and I'd say we were turning down like 50% of the inquiries we were getting at that time because we just didn't have enough people to manage them. But now we're just kind of in a like medium phase. I think we get some things that are like, yeah, that budget just isn't going to work, or timeline isn't going to work. But usually we're pretty open these days, or currently anyway, to doing all sorts of different stuff. But I'd say at its worst, it's like 50% that we're turning down. Or best, I don't know. Be either.
Sometimes you just gotta say no.
Yeah.
Your time is best used elsewhere, and so is mine. That's okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, anybody in the stage chat want to hop on in? Anybody have any spicy cues to chat about?
That is how you do it. You just raise your hand.
Raise your hand in that there stage.
Ooh.
What
Oh,
up,
we got a
Nick?
server
Glad to
booster in
see
here.
ya. Nick, our resident first tournament runner-up.
Absolutely killing it.
Killing the game.
Don't worry, Nick.
Speaking of, there's shoot, I gotta get this
to respond to some of the stuff today.
Yep, I gotta get the new tournament announcement posted. We're doing a second challenge tournament, and I still have not actually put that on social, but we do already have like 7 people out of the 16, and I haven't even posted it anywhere other than the Discord, so it's gonna fill up pretty quick. Novascope says, in your short honed, how did you achieve the 3D effect with the half spear spinning? I thought Cinema 4D, but never saw you use it in streams. Oh, no Cinema 4D here. I tricked ya. Let me open it for you real quick. I actually recorded a breakdown of this a little while ago. I just don't think that Jackson or Danny ever got to editing it because it just got like shuffled around. But basically what I did, actually I'll just pull it up on Instagram so I don't have to open these big old files and such. 1 second.
Nova Scopes, you've tricked me. Your profile picture is a mouse, and in the chat it appears about the same size as my mouse, so I thought that my mouse was there and you just didn't have a profile picture. Oh my god. I can't believe this.
They really got you.
I've been so gotten.
So this section is what we're referring to. It's, oh, whoops, somehow I skipped past it. 1 second. This spot. Okay, so this little like teacup thing is rotating around on top of the circle. Basically what I did was just have a half circle shape. Top is just cut off, right? And then there's this ellipse on top that just expands out like this. And the main trick for the whole thing was that I set that basic animation up super linearly, like no easing to anything at all. So it was literally just a half circle sitting still with an ellipse on top, just going like this, right? Then you pre-comp that, and I could time remap. Or actually, sorry, I did another thing inside of there before I pre-comped it. I put all of that attached to a null that was at the bottom of the shape and just had it like rotate back and forth linearly like this. So you essentially just had like this thing rotating like this with a little like blinking thing on the top. Okay. Then I pre-comp all that. It's all linear animation baked in there. Then right click and hit time remap. And then I could ease that. And it made it so that it looked like it was like super fast and like this. Whereas if I hadn't done the time remap easing, it would have just been like, we. It still would have worked okay, but it would have looked really robotic and kind of weird. But that was all that it was. Is just being like, okay, really all that a teacup shape needs to be is just an ellipse on top and then a half circle, and we're chilling. So that was it. The ellipse is just animated on the top, just going like this. Easy peasy. And for the ball that's on the top of this thing, I just hand keyframed it because I had done too much to make it easy to parent that at that point. I could have gone back and fixed it, but I was zooming, so that did not happen. So I just decided to hand keyframe instead, because that seemed like, although the jankest way I could have done it, the quickest over like building a whole other rig or something.
Sometimes with these short scenes, you gotta just hand keyframe some stuff. I've been there.
Yeah, just gotta happen. Oh, I'm realizing there's a chat in the there was a chat in the actual like channel for the stage that I just missed. That's okay though. There were no questions in there. John says, why not animate without the time remapping, but just animate the easing of both? Because that's way more difficult to control. It was just easier to be able to have everything super linear so that I could just be like, oh, if I need to change this value or whatever, it's no big deal. Because the easing is actually happening outside the pre-comp. And it just, with how I had things parented, there was some sort of weird, like corners were slipping in different places or just like weird overshoots that were happening on some things. So just made it easier to control, I guess. Nick says, speaking on the tournament, I'd love some feedback on what I should focus more on design-wise in future projects after seeing my tournament submissions. Let's go through it, shall we? Let me pull this up. In the meantime, if there's other things, just let me know and I'll answer while I'm looking for it. Animation submission.
So sorry about your pencil.
One.
That's tragic.
All right. Let me get a screen share going with you. Well, I guess with just the chat.
I really liked the design of the transportation one. The thing I would have changed on that is, I think what we mentioned in the actual stream, it's specifically the clouds and some of the other elements felt a little flat, clip arty-esque, while everything else felt very like 3D, dynamic, and fun. So I would try and bring those things a little bit more into that world, give them a little bit more of a treatment that feels more 3D.
It's just a consistency thing, really. Like there's points in here where like, I mean, there's no gradients or anything going on here necessarily, but there's good depth to this, you know? I don't really, I don't think this one really had that much of a design issue to me. I think that one was fine, honestly. I mean, that's why it was like far and ahead the best submission for that round, I think. I think you had really good consistency in your first round as well. Which was it? This one? Yes. This was great too. Very consistent color palette. Everything felt pretty solid. And other things that was just like motion that we talked about with this. So design wise, I think this was totally fine. You know, I would no qualms.
Push to make, I think a little bit more texturing on like the book could have brought it in with some of the other effects. But that second scene, in contrast with the first, is a lot darker, so perhaps I'd bring a little bit more light and something else into it
Mm.
because it doesn't feel as impactful as this like book with this little bit of screen shake at the beginning and like lots of things moving, and then it kind of gets darker and settles on given a very cool, well-designed frame, but it doesn't feel as impactful as I think it could.
I would say that if uh, we're ending on this spot where like the backlight is so bright that we're silhouetting the things in front of it, then there should be more of a change in the background in terms of just how like the whole scene is getting lit up, because it doesn't
Yeah.
really make sense for this to be silhouetted, but the book not be if it's got
The
this backlight.
transition between the person moving in front of the book is a fantastic transition, but because the person is so dark towards the end of that transition, it loses a bit of its oomph. You know what I mean? Like it gets so dark there for a second.
Oh, you're talking about like there?
Mm.
I don't know. I didn't really think about that too much, or it didn't really like throw me off. Um, I don't know. I'm trying to like we've seen this a bunch of times at this point, so I'm trying to avoid just giving you like super minimal things that like nobody else is going to notice unless they've watched it this many times. So I, like more most of the design feedback I think is on this one. And a lot of it we talked about on that uh, stream for the reviews on this, but I think something that you really just got to work on is just how you're treating lighting when it's not actually something 3D. You know, I think when you're doing it with cell, you've got a pretty good idea of like how that works, and I think you do that nicely. But when it comes to the more like emography stuff, I think that you struggle sometimes in how bright and how much you're still able to see all the details within some objects when they're not necessarily like there's no lighting context for that, you know? Like if
Mm-hmm.
you're showing us that ooh, this scene is pretty dark, and then like when they all combine it glows for a second or something, that's cool. That all makes sense. But it's when it's all bright again and they're like not really doing anything to the background, there's nothing for them to cast light onto or anything to show like, hey, why is this thing so bright in this space, you know? um that's the main thing for me overall. It's just figuring out how lighting would actually work, but within these like 2D tools that we have at our disposal with gradients and those sorts of things. Because especially on these guys, it just doesn't match the lighting that you've set up. You know, um, whether this is like a black hole and you've got this stuff around the edges or something. If that were the case, this should be the brightest part of the scene. You know, because there's all the lights like getting sucked in here, right? And so if you've got this thing that is somehow brighter like this with no light source that you can see that's actually casting on it or affecting the background in any other way, then it just doesn't, there's no reason for it to be that way. It doesn't, we
Right.
don't have the visual context for it to make sense for it to be that bright. And the reason that's an issue is just because it starts to make your elements feel disjointed. It doesn't feel like your whole piece is super cohesive. You can start to pick out like that's a layer, that's a layer, this is one pre-comp, this is one pre-comp, and you don't want to be able to do that. It should all feel like you could have made it within one pre-comp, you know? Rather than it feeling like elements that are pieced together. It should all feel like one symphony, I guess, rather than individual instruments.
It should feel like I don't even know what program they used to do this. Wow.
True. Yeah. Because you can see that in like I mean, we talked about that too. It really is just that middle section that gets kind of inconsistent in terms of the styling. Because if you like, if I guess a good test for it, a good litmus test is just if you pick like a frame from each scene, just completely at random, this feels like it generally still matches with this. Okay. You know, like these feel like they're
Mhm.
from the same video, but this does not really feel like it's in the same video here. Like it feels like it starts to get a little funky. And most importantly, the contrast I think is between this and this, you know? It just doesn't really feel like they're living in the same universe. They're like kind of close cousins, but it's just not as tight knit as it could be, you know? Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, lighting I think is the most powerful thing for me. People ask all the time how we do gradients and those sorts of things, but it's I think because a lot of people just think about how to use gradients as a visual element, whereas we're just trying to be like, I don't want to use a 3D program. How can I use them to emulate light instead? You know? And I we were struggling with this on a project that we've had to create basically over the past couple days. It was like a super tight timeline,
Mhm.
and trying to figure out how to keep all the visuals consistent and those sorts of things. It was for me hardest to concept up until the point where I actually had a visual, like I could create a visual rule set. I was like, oh, gradients are treated like this because this. And in
Right.
our example, it was like, oh, color is when there are shadows in this. Like color is in place of shadows, and otherwise everything else is grayscale. Was like a general guiding principle. Um,
Okay.
and that makes it a lot easier, I think, because then even if nobody else has set rules for you, you can kind of have those bounding boxes, and you can be like, that shape doesn't match my rule set, and that's why it feels off, you know?
It's a really good baseline like thing to pay attention to make things look proper. And as you work more with how do I make this lighting kind of these colors and these shapes kind of feel like they have semi-realistic lighting, as you kind of understand it more and more,
Mm.
you can like fudge it a little bit more and like do different interesting things with it and like use blurs in strategic ways, and it can totally be passable in that way. But I think if you're struggling with it at all, just try and ask yourself like what would be more realistic here in terms of lighting. It's such a good way of thinking about it, and I was also thinking about that same thing on that recent project, and
Oh,
it just made it 100 times better. I'm like, you know what I should do? Since these objects are so shiny, I should add like little shine things that go through them, and it added so much. Like, if you just think of it and come at it from a space of, if this existed in the real world, what would the lighting be? What would the texture be? How would lighting bounce off of it? Where are the light sources? It's gonna come out great.
because as much as we can wow people and do things that are what you wouldn't be able to see in reality, our brains are still rooted in some ways that things just need to work for it to make sense, you know?
Hmm.
Especially
And
when
as you
you,
learn more about like how the brain perceives stuff, you can
yeah,
fudge it more and more and do some crazier, wackier things. But you need to understand it first, I think. It's very
yeah,
similar to like people drawing and like expressionism and that kind of stuff. Like really, you just you see like a painting from far away, and this tiny little like abstract little brushstroke represents a whole car from far away. You're like, yeah, that makes sense. Um, but when you get closer, it's just a mess of paint. I think that's such a one-to-one example of like they just understand how you're perceiving stuff, and they can emulate it without necessarily making the thing.
yeah. We're we have this workshop that we've been doing for a little while. There's no signups for it, so if you're thinking about that, the answer is no. But we're making a video with a bunch of different people that we have never worked with before, and are just trying to learn from this workshop. And it's very difficult for some of them to be able to look at some of the other pieces and just make stuff that feels like it fits, you know? Um, and we see this in the projects that we're doing with our team too. Sometimes you just start working on a scene, you have a good idea or whatever, but like it gets to the point where you're storyboarding, everybody else has their frames done, and then you put yours in, and it just doesn't match. But that's a super important skill to understand and develop, I think, is to be able to like pull yourself back out of the work that you just put in on that thing and just be like, does this actually feel like it fits, or does this feel just completely ridiculous? Like, can I just save this for another project or something? Like, it might just not fit here, you know? Because that, while comparison is definitely the thief of joy in some situations, when you're working on a team like that, I think it's incredibly important to be able to put your stuff side by side with, especially if you're trying to emulate somebody's style, or like you want to make something similar to blank. Actually be able to sit there, put your stuff side by side and be like, why does this feel so good to me, and what am I missing in mine? Because I feel like a lot of times people will get caught up in like just the sheer amount of effort that it took to get like a baseline thing that they feel like is similar, that they get lost. They just get lost in the sauce and can't really see how it actually looks different from the emulated version, you know, or from the like reference piece that they were actually using, you know?
Yeah. Trying to be able to look at that work objectively, not necessarily like compare total, because it's just one output. It's not
Yeah.
like total skills that can get easily caught up in it. But yeah.
I think that that happens for a lot of people with tutorials too. Like
Oh yeah.
people will spend so much time just being like, well, I did the steps, so therefore it has to end up looking like this thing. But this isn't like a, you're not like giving yourself
Science.
like robot instructions or some shit, you know, to be able to do stuff. It takes trial and error. And one of, I think, the best exercises for people, man, the amount of DMs I get from people that are in, like, if I were to sum up what they're asking me, is basically just, hey, can you learn this for me? Like the type of message where it's like, I would literally have to dump all of my experience into your brain for you to be able to understand this thing. Is that a lot of people will not just start doing something, you know, if they like want to learn motion, or they want to like they want to make a scene that feels like a shot from another video or something. They want to know exactly how that person did it, instead of just using what they know to try and make something that looks like it instead. Like, I don't understand why that's the case for so many people. They want to know like what the right way is, or some silver bullet way to do shit. And it's just like, it is so much easier to learn even if the best way you can do it is just doing it frame by frame or something. It doesn't matter, as long as you can just like get to an end result that you like, you know? That's the important part, rather than being like, well, but is my way actually correct because they used this repeater function and I just like duplicated my layers a couple times. That's totally fine. Doesn't matter. As long as you got where you wanted, who cares?
Yeah, I mean, like we don't even know expressions very well.
Mm-mm.
Like there are so many things that I have done in the wackiest, craziest, weirdest ways that if you showed like an animator at Buck or something, they'd be like, "This man is insane." But hey, I got there. So that's what mattered.
Yeah,
You make good stuff, you make good stuff. It doesn't matter really how you get there.
I agree. Timo says, are you still in the process of sending feedback to all the job applicants? I completely understand if you don't want to do that anymore, though. It seemed like a lot of work. Well, we are a pretty small studio, and I was thinking best case scenario, we might get like 50 applicants across all 3 submissions, and I think the total was like 250. So I mean, I would say a vast majority, like 85% of the people who applied, like I would have to write a whole course in order to like, it was one of those things, right? Like I just have to dump my whole experience into your brain for you to get what I'm talking about, you know? To where it was just like kind of hard to put into words some of the feedback, and especially in a way that would seem productive. We had the same sort of thing happen when Noah and I went to SCAD to do these portfolio reviews for these graduating seniors. And sometimes you'll get a portfolio sent in from somebody, and like they'll have spent years working on their craft or something, but it feels like they just weren't prepared well enough or efficiently enough, you know? Like, do you have a better way of explaining what I'm saying? You know what I'm trying to get to with this, I think.
You kind of do.
But it's just like it doesn't feel like the right time sometimes. Like it almost feels like it would just be more hurtful than anything, like too discouraging to actually give somebody like all of the notes that you would give on something.
I know what you mean.
To where it's like it's kind of against the point, you know? Like, would it really actually help the person to be like, here is absolutely everything that I see wrong and what you could fix with this thing, when it would be like a mountain of stuff, you know? And also, Timo, I'm not saying that do not take what I'm saying and then apply that to you, because this was like a generalization from like the majority of applicants that we got. There were just a lot of people that just like did not have the, I don't want to say experience because that's not what it is, but I don't know. Do you know what I'm saying? Does that make
Never the sauce, which is something that you can get. I think that like sometimes a kick in the pants. I had one when I was younger. When I was younger, a couple years ago, as in, uh, and it was very helpful. Even though it was from someone that didn't quite know what they were talking about, it was still helpful because at the time I thought they did know what they were talking about, um, and I was like, okay, I need to reevaluate. I'm nowhere near as good as I want to be, and to actually look at that and kind of face it was helpful to be like, okay, let's get this shit going, and I did, and I can still do that. Sometimes it's easy to become complacent if all the work around you is of similar
and
what's the right
also
word, quality, I suppose.
everybody is just yes queening your work regardless of like how it compares on the grand scheme of things, you know.
Speaking of
I know
yes queen,
I know I fall into that, you know. When I was just doing the loops all the time, I was just comparing whatever I was making to that stuff, you know.
mm-hmm.
And I know there's things to improve on that and whatever, but what I don't want to get across is what John said, and I know he said it sarcastically, but still. But basically, Austin is calling all of us trash, and that he would need to write a book for us to learn something. Not what I mean. Okay, well, you know what? Here's an easier thing.
Mm-hmm.
For like 85% of the applicants or so, I would say this general feedback applies. The easing does not emulate the weightiness of real life objects or physics enough. Oh, did Noah just crash? I think he might have. I think his internet just went out. I'll take it. It's all good. The physics is not really like something that really works for Revi is that we're able to. Oh, you're back now?
Back.
Okay, cool. What works really well for Revi is that we're able to emulate enough of like rooting our motion in the real world. Like things feel like they weigh as much as they look like they should, you know, or when they bounce on things or whatever. We do lots of shit with shapes, so it's very important for us to have like a strong sense of physics with those. And what we saw for most people was a lot of just like you hit F9 and that was kind of it. There really wasn't a whole lot of attention spent in the graphs, or if there was, it's not what you thought it was, or it was just linear. And another thing that was difficult was there were some people, this is like more in the like small group that didn't get interviews, but could have if their design was better. Like there were enough people that had okay motion that we could have helped train, but the design just was like colors were clashing, fonts that just did not match the vibe were being used, like the compositions weren't really sitting well. I don't know. Like
I've said it before, having a good foundation of design is so helpful, especially when going into animation.
Yeah.
Barbara, do you think that's true? Did you
Did you
find that
bring
your
Barbara in
foundation
here?
of
Oh, she's
design
just sitting in the.
helped you?
That's hilarious.
What's up,
I
Barbara?
agree. I have a question.
Oh,
What's
okay,
up?
I
great.
have a request.
What's up?
I want to become a motion designer. Help.
Okay, cool. Well, great. Now that we're on this topic, sure, no problem. Barbara, how about you tell people, since you have accelerated way faster in the past like 6 months than most people probably have.
But
I'm throwing
I
it back and
asked.
putting you on the spot. Well, it's hey, mirror. I'm talking to
You
real
can't
Barbara
do
now.
that.
Sorry, it's happening. Come on, you
Damn
gotta have.
it.
There's got to be some little nugget of knowledge or something from your experience so far.
Well, I guess practice makes perfect, and the fact that we've had so much work in the past months, and especially when I joined, it was
Sure.
a lot of projects, and I wasn't expecting that at all to have that much on me because I started working on the actual projects like right when I joined. But that was great. and that really, really helped. Just like creating nonstop. And even if you don't have projects, then you have personal projects. And then just looking at your guys' work and the way you do things. I mean, you and Massetti and Sam, and just learn and ask. All of that really, really helped me become a motion designer.
There you go.
And now Barbara's a motion designer.
I'm so glad that we immediately started throwing you in on client projects. I think that that is absolutely the way to do it.
That's the takeaway, I think.
Especially when people start as interns and shit. Just like, because, I mean, literally the best way to learn is by doing stuff. So why would you not just be like, go, do it?
I think the vast majority of people spend too much time practicing and not enough time actually applying stuff. I'd say that
Best practice is applying.
you can very clearly tell, like, it got to the point in the applications where we could very easily, just within like 5 seconds of being on someone's portfolio, be like, nope, not a good fit. Because there are some things that you can just see that are red flags in people's work about, like, if their main source of practice is just following tutorials, or if they're, I feel like I had another like succinct point that I could make there, but I don't think I do. But you can tell if somebody's doing something from tutorials, or if it feels like it's stuck in like very early stage motion design, like 2013 style motion is like a very specific look. It's super desaturated colors. It's like animating cartoony looking versions of realistic objects, and there's like really no abstraction. Pretty much, it's just like reanimating realistic scenes, or it's like just type. I don't know. It's kind of hard to like narrow that down, I guess. But you can. I can make a graph for this, man, but it's just a hard thing to describe without a visual for it. But there's like, you can see the spectrum of what experience a motion designer has had, and regardless of how long it has been. But I also just wanted to say that John said, interesting, because I recently got almost the opposite feedback, saying that I don't need to be an amazing illustrator, just be good at motion and focus on that and collab with illustrators to do that for me. Well, let me tell you something. I think that there's some weird, just everybody has a different perspective in our industry on like what our jobs should mean. And for Ravi, a motion designer is that it is a combination of, oh, there Noah goes again. I don't know what happened. It's a combination of two things. You can animate, that's the motion part, and you can design, that's the designer part. Some people will take that to mean motion designer is just a glorified animator and you just are good at animating things. You design the motion. But to me, it is very, very important to have both to work here, because everybody on the team is doing both of those things already. So if like we don't have people who are just illustrators, everybody does both, which means that everybody can plug into different parts of the process easily, which just makes more sense for us, because that person is if somebody on our team is able to design their frame and their scene, they are going to know it best, and then it makes sense for them to animate it if they can do that, you know. Rather than
and that
having
makes
to, like,
you
try and
independent
interpret between. Right, because you can go off and make whatever scenes you want. You don't have to rely on somebody else's direction or whatever. You can just be in your box if you want to be, and make your set of scenes. Motion Ninja says, personally, I don't think there's necessarily an outdated style if it's used in the proper context, especially in that example of not using abstraction. I think there's a time and place. I might just disagree with you on that last bit. I agree on the first bit. When I say it's when I say like 2013 motion, it's not necessarily that like there's actually a style like collage or 2D or 3D that's associated with that. That's just like a blanket statement that I can make to sort of compile like it's overall just inconsistent in the design.
I think
like
that it
couldn't tell what it was going to be.
Yeah,
know?
it's kind of tricky to talk about style in that way because
Just awkward
things
phases.
from different eras kind of look the same, but it doesn't come down to just like what visual techniques they use.
Right.
It's kind of a lot more. It's kind of like the zeitgeist. What was popular at the time? What was the understanding? What was the programs? Like what could people do and what did people do? And I don't think, I mean, styles kind of, if you break it up more visually and simplistically, it's kind of similar to fashion, where like some things will go out of style and then come back a couple years later. Like maybe super clean, fancy gradients are going to go out of style and then come back in like a year or two. It's a pendulum, things go out of style and come back in style endlessly. And so in that way, nothing ever fully goes out of style and stays out of style, but different eras have like different kind of staples, and that early 2010s had a lot of flat colors that it just didn't go well together. People a lot of the times didn't know what they were doing. After Effects was kind of like a motion design was just emerging, and with that boom, I think a lot of people just started out, which is totally fine, but it didn't necessarily generate the most groundbreaking things,
Right.
especially to our standards now, having come so far.
Right. It feels just like it looks like something from to people who would have been like just starting in After Effects, you know?
Hmm.
Like that's what it looks like. And that makes sense because there were just a lot of people starting to use it back then. Um and as far as the hold on. Wait a second. I don't think there's necessarily how to see the style if it's used in proper context, especially in the example of not using abstraction. I do kind of feel like motion should be pretty heavily abstracted most times. I I'd say like I don't know. To me, if I was a business, if it's something I could get out of a camera, especially with how pricing is now, I almost feel like it might be cheaper sometimes to just go and do that with a live action crew or just get a camera and film it myself rather than having somebody spend hours and hours having to animate that scene, you know?
You can literally animate anything. Like your mind is the boundary. Like just do something that explains it in a cooler or more interesting or more unique way because you can.
Right.
And that is so much better in a lot of ways for the medium if you do that, you know?
I
And
agree.
Oh, now we got
yes,
Will. Hell yeah.
Will agrees
Let's
as well.
go.
I too have a question.
Oh,
Oh,
what's up?
what's your
And
question,
as
Will?
with Barbara, I long to be a motion designer. I
Oh
spend
Oh,
my
my
right.
days
goodness. Hopefully
Of
we can
course.
help.
I spend my days wishing to be as good as the motion gods. But my
Uh-huh.
question is, what was the biggest knockback in your career and how did it shape your career?
Oh,
Ooh, that's a
dear.
good
There's
question,
been so
Will.
many. Which to choose?
Biggest
You know, it's kind of funny. There's not really a single one that like stands out in my mind. I think it's one of those things where there's just like enough of them that it smooths out over time.
Yeah, it's like it's consistently bumpy, and
Yeah.
everyone kind of brings its own realization and value to our
I guess like
lives. And
what spot
I
hurt the
don't know.
most? Has there been a spot that's been like the biggest pain in
I got two
this
spots
sort of
that have
thing?
felt very painful. One was the one I mentioned a little bit ago,
Yeah.
where someone was like, it was the head of graphic design at the time when I was trying to get into the program at NC State.
Mm-hmm.
He said my work looks like a high schooler's work, and just wasn't good, which was really painful, man.
Yeah.
To hear someone just be like, your work's just not good. Like, period, it's not good.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Look at you
especially when it's
now.
something that you care so much about.
Exactly.
Have you looked back at that work and decided he was wrong or have you agreed?
Oh no, he's totally right. That was garbage. It
But
wasn't
also,
good.
but compared to, in all fairness, compared to the other people that were like that Noah was
Sure.
being compared to at the time, it was an unfair statement in that comparison.
Yeah, it was an unfair statement. It was very helpful to me.
Right.
But I think what really he was trying to say is that like he couldn't see the design thinking and like the actual thought behind what I was doing or the
Right.
passion necessarily, in that he's seen it in different ways often and wasn't able to, it didn't translate for him. But that work
Yeah.
was not fantastic, especially by my standards now. And that
But I don't think that it
really gave me
should.
a kick
I
in the
went
pants.
when I changed programs in my uni from
Mhm.
like fundamental linguistics, fundamental and computational linguistics to design. I started designing only when I joined that program. Like before that, I had tried animating, like motion graphics, editing,
Mhm.
but never design. I mean, illustrating a little bit, but not design. And when I joined, I didn't know anything. And people who were with me in that program, in my group, they had like gone to art school. They had so much experience. And I was like, hey, that's me. I make shit. And I did make terrible things, terrible. But just being around people, it's just really
Mhm.
good to be around people who are so much better than you at certain
Yeah,
things because it
I
does
agree.
accelerate you a lot
I absolutely
just
agree.
looking up to that. So yeah, I don't feel like you have to be good at design if you decide to go to university.
Yeah,
You
I mean,
just learn
yeah, you
there.
don't have to be good right off the bat. The whole point is to learn, which
Yeah.
actually goes into my second big setback, which was um, when I realized that the university I was going to didn't value me there, and I wasn't able to get what I really wanted to out of it, which was to like really get into design and learn and like explore this deep passion I had, and that just wasn't going to happen. That was very painful. Um, but I mean, it led to me leaving, which was one of the best decisions I've ever made.
Agreed. For me, it was going to
Same,
be.
dropout gang.
For me, it was either going to be that moment where like we got that letter from the school, or
Yeah.
that sort of thing, or like that whole experience of trying to fix that and it just not working, or when I was at that marketing agency and like at every turn, like despite however much work I was doing for them or like how much I was trying to improve things, like whatever I was doing was just completely devalued in terms of like money and also the amount of like input they were willing to actually take from me in terms of actionable stuff, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Because I felt like I had been doing stuff on my own for a really long time and I was finally in a position where I could like bring all of that to the table like for someone else, and then to just be like completely shut down like over and over and over again. And like I know I was one of the youngest people on that team, but to be like treated and for it to feel like I was one of the youngest people even though they were only like 2 years older than me was just ridiculous. Like it felt so silly, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But we move
I
onward
do.
and upward. You know how it is.
Yeah. There was one more question I wanted to get to, and then I don't think we have really
No,
any
we
more
do
time.
not.
And it was on our conversation of trends, Move Shape says, would that mean that motion designers should follow trends, just like what it is quite common in fashion?
Mm-mm.
Just like what is quite common in fashion. I no, because we should be determining those trends. We should be on the forefront, um, exploring what can be rather than doing what is. You know what I mean? Like go figure out what the next trend is going to be, but not with that goal in mind,
Yeah.
with the goal of making something cool and unique and blending different things that you love with a heart full of passion and a handful of mouse. Go figure out
Handful of
figure out
mouth.
how to make something cool and unique, and then maybe that'll contribute to the next trends. But we should not, I think, at all be focused on what is currently trending, um, honestly, much at all. Just focus on what you really like. And
And
if you like something
explore.
that is out of trend, that's fine. Do it up. I'm sure you'll find a way to bring it back yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important to just have fun and experiment as much
Hmm.
as you can. That's the only way that you can find out what you actually want to do, styles you like, and
Exactly.
everything.
Agreed.
Every time I've done something with my work that's like been cutting edge to some extent, it's been from me experimenting for an hour beforehand and just making something because I wanted to
Yep.
try combining two random things and oh shit, it does this. Do you know what I mean? It's a
Right.
good time.
I agree. Unfortunately, that is all
Yep.
the time we have because we got to go talk to our workshop people. However, I
Mhm.
will say I know people have lots of good questions and things. So I'll hop in the voice chat in the Discord later today, and we can keep talking about these things. because there are some pretty big ones in the chat of like, could you please give some logic or motivation to push yourself beyond your boundaries, and other things like that. So
Wait, could we?
I'll hop in
Yeah.
there a little bit later. We just got to get through a couple of calls and stuff first. So join the review Discord, link in the description, if you haven't already, and we'll hop in there and chat about it later.
Cheers, y'all.
Cool. We'll see y'all.